Hello, this is the My Artifact episode number 3697. Today's date is November 11, 2025. It's been almost like a night at 10:14 p.m. Alright, let's just jump into the question. Alright, the question is, what if time existed outside of human perception? Okay, this question is little bit something difficult. It's not difficult, but it's something hard to understand. Okay, but okay, whatever. Let's just jump into. First of all, what exactly is this question, and why am I asking this question to myself? This is what if question. Why am I asking this question to myself? What if question is always really interested way to give the answer. It kind of like force you to think about that reality. And when you try to think about that reality, you kind of like when you try to create that reality, when you try to construct that reality, it kind of like it really required a kind of like a knowledge and information and experience and everything. Okay, yeah. And then you are kind of like creating that reality. Okay. And somehow when I try to do that thing, when I try to kind of like simply explore those information inside of my mind, it felt somehow good. I don't know how do I supposed to explain this, how I feel really good, but it felt good. Disclaimer. The information that I'm trying to tell you is not exactly right or is not exactly wrong either. It is just my opinion. So do not believe in any kind of like information that I'm saying, or do not seek any kind of like some information that I'm saying. It is just my opinion, and opinion are subjective. Alright, everything good? Now let's proceed further. Now regarding about the question says that what if the time existed outside of human perception? Now if I kind of like simply translate into Hindi, it says क्या होगा यदि समय मानवीय धारणा से परे हो. Okay, I don't know how, like it's like basically this thing, I try to understand this question, but it's somewhat something really hard to understand this question. I understand somewhat something, but probably I'm not. Okay, yeah. Okay, so I'm gonna kind of like dissect the entire question. What is actually meaning of this question, and what is actually answer, what is actually question wants to say. The question says, what if time existed outside the human perception? Now what is actually human perception? What is actually existing? It means that now it means that ki, okay, I'm gonna kind of like explain this thing as simple as possible as you can. Okay, let's just say that ki you are playing a sport. Okay, like basically I like badminton. Okay, yeah. So when I play badminton, time just flies. Okay, yeah. Like basically, like when I was kind of like playing badminton, I just feel like that I just play almost like a 10-minute or 15-minute. But probably in actual, I kind of like spend almost like a half, or maybe almost like a more than half, or like a 45-50 minute. Okay, yeah. Same thing happened with the kind of like watching a movie. Let's just say you are kind of like watching kind of like a movie. Oh.
देखो पतला वाला दिया कर दिया नहीं आराम से पेट ये सुरुचि दीदी ने हमको राखी में दिया, रुचि दीदी को, मुझे और वही को. हाँ वो लोग तो नीचे सोते हैं ना. ओ अच्छी तो लगाओ का ना साथ में दूर से मस्त एक टांग से दरवाजा खोलती है मतलब इतने ही 10 तारीख में कानमेलू कानमेलू नहीं हे पांढरी आहे ना काही त्यामुळे केस नाही दिसत घ्याटाने
मैंने पहली बार देखा कोई स्मोक नहीं खाता
क्या
बटर
हम लोग नहीं खाते अब तो फिर भी मैं बड़ी हुई हूँ तो थोड़ा समझ आया कि खाना चाहिए पर बड़ी मम्मी ने बताया तो मेरा भी आजा ठीक है क्या खा ली जब तो खाली नहीं देते मुझे भी फिर भी मैंने खाया पता है
क्यों ऐसा उसमें कुछ गलत नहीं है
कुछ गलत नहीं बट ये लोग जब से हम बोर्न में तब से मैं खाया
ऐसे कुछ ये है क्या यानी
एलर्जी
वगैरह नहीं ना
पर ऐसे खाने जैसा अगर रोटी में हुआ तो ऑटोमेटिकली पक्की है
नहीं ये फिर आपका परसेप्शन है आप इफ यू थिंक लाइक दैट
कर लेती ना उसको हमें पाने की ही है पर नहीं जमता
आपने सोच लिया कि उससे मुझे ऐसा होता है फुल
मग पण धू 10 रुपयांचा विस्तार आता आणखी मोठा चालतो आणखी जास्त
मी खाल्ली तू खाल्ला
मुझे थोड़ा वो आ जाए मेथीची केस बनवते आखून स्ट्रॉंग आणि जास्वंद बाहेरून क्लिनिक क्लास
Alright, recording was okay. Sorry, I was a little bit occupied. Okay, alright. Okay, what exactly is this thing? Okay, I just didn't really start the answering the question. Okay, the question is that what if the time existed outside the human perception? Okay, yeah. First of all, let's just understand the question a little bit better. Okay, yeah. What is exactly meaning of perception? A perception means like that ki like basically how do we supposed to be kind of like somebody experience time? Okay, yeah. Now it's very hard to explain or it's very hard to understand, but it's not at the same time. Okay, what exactly is this thing? I'm trying to explain this thing as simple as kind of like somebody that thinky as you can resonate. Okay, yeah. Like basically is this thing, whatever you like to do. Let's just say you are kind of like watching a movie named Avenger Endgame. Okay, yeah. Avenger Endgame, one of the classic movie. Okay. By the way, this movie is almost like a 2 hour something, 2 hour 45, 50 minutes something. Okay, yeah. So when you are watching this particular movie, you don't really understand where time goes. You just kind of like only watching that particular movie, and 2 hour feels like that a kind of like half an hour. Okay, yeah. But when you are kind of like somebody doing an exam or a kind of like a thing, let's just say you are kind of like somebody doing an exam. Okay, yeah. So in the exam, you have to be kind of like a sit on your desk for almost like a 3 hour, and you just feel like that the 3 hour is a kind of like a bit more longer. Okay, yeah. Like basically, have you ever experienced that sometime time can run really fast, but sometime time can run very slow? And this is what kind of like a somebody called perception. Like this is how we kind of like a somebody pursue the time regarding about how do we think and stuff like that. When we are really engaged with a kind of like a doing stuff, time goes really rapidly. But when you are kind of like a doing the same thing, kind of like somebody just like a boring stuff, then time goes very slow. And this is our kind of like a somebody perception. Okay, this is kind of like a somebody human perception. Okay, yeah. But scientifically, time is a universal constant. Okay, yeah. It kind of like somebody similar to everywhere, but not exactly similar. Okay, what exactly is this thing? Like, okay, is this thing that ki I like basically na? Let me give you context. Okay, yeah. I was like in our human history, we have so many scientists who discovered something. J.J. Thomson discovered electron, Graham Bell discovered telephone. Okay, Alan Turing discovered the inscription machine, decryption machine, वगैरह. Okay, decode the enigma. Okay, then it became computer. So basically, is this thing na ki we have so many people who kind of like invent so many stuff. Thomas Edison invent the bulb. Okay, yeah. But there is a one instrument that actually exists in everywhere. Okay, yeah. But I am kind of like somebody unaware that who actually invented that thing. And that is a time, a clock. You have a clock, you have a wristwatch. Who actually invented this thing? You might not have any kind of like somebody answer for this thing. Now, why? Why is that? Like, why you not have any kind of like answer? Because let me tell you one thing. Time is a kind of like simply a different thing. Okay, yeah. There is no one specific person who invented the time. No. Like basically, since we are kind of like somebody living the life, we really required, a human really required a kind of like something document things. Document things means like that. They document that key when this thing happened, when this thing happened, when this thing happened. They wanted to kind of like something. They need a kind of like somebody such a system that kind of like somebody point where it actually happened. Now thousands of years ago, almost like a thousands of years ago, people usually kind of like somebody remember by how many days and how many nights ago. Like basically 3 days ago there is a kind of like a something forest fire happened. Okay, yeah. 3 days ago means like that ki basically 3 days means like that the time and day actually happened. So basically we actually kind of like a measure by 3 days ago, 3 nights ago this actually happened. But this is just a kind of like a something, just a very vague unit to kind of like understand the time. Okay, because at that time was not even kind of like a something a thing. Okay, yeah. But as a human really required a kind of like a something document something, and they wanted to document that when such thing happened, when kind of like a some things happened, when kind of like a something the another king is actually invade our kind of like empire or things like that. So they need a kind of like some specific amount of unit so that they would supposed to be measure. Okay, yeah. And since then, they kind of like invented the clock. It's not a kind of like a simply clock that you are kind of like a simply seeing right now. They are kind of like a simply, kind of like a simply invented by kind of like a simply determine the time and day. How do we supposed to divide that thing? Okay, yeah. And kind of like a someone kind of like a create a mechanism, and that mechanism that we continue called as a kind of like a simply time. Okay, yeah. So basically, is this thing, the question is actually kind of like still continues that key, who actually invented the clock is actually a human invented the clock. Human, yeah, entire human civilization, because the time, the like a basically the documentation of kind of like a understand the time. Every civilization actually try to invent a way to kind of like a simply document the things actually happened, like Indus Valley civilization, Chinese civilization, Mesopotamia civilization. Every civilization are try to figure it out that they need a kind of like a something way to count the day happen, night happen, and things like that. Okay, yeah. And every civilization has a kind of like a different way to do that thing. Okay, yeah. Now we are living in this modern world, and we have kind of like a simply globalization and things like that. We are kind of like a sharing information, and that's why we are kind of like a have this clock. Okay, so who actually invented the clock is human actually invented, and every human actually invented the clock. Okay, yeah. It's not just only one person gives the credit. It just entire human civilization actually invented the clock. Now, the human perception regarding about the time is that a bit more flexible. Like basically, since beginning of the human, we really understand the importance of the time and things like that. Okay, yeah. But in scientific point of perspective, time is a kind of like a things that human can't even understand how big is that. Okay, yeah. Let me give you context. Okay, yeah. If I'm gonna say the human is actually ruling the world, is that statement right or wrong? Obviously right. Okay, yeah. Like basically the human species are evolved so much that kind of like assembly it evolved. Like basically is this thing, in the rest of the kind of like a species, human species are kind of like assembly spread all across the planet. Okay, yeah. And they are in very large number. Yeah, very large number. Like 8 billion people are actually living. 8 billion humans are actually living on this planet, which is kind of like a really big number. Okay, yeah. Now, what I'm trying to tell you is this thing that key. Basically, if I'm gonna say who actually kind of like assembly rule this planet, you might gonna answer human. Yeah, but and if you kind of like assembly whatever the kind of like a history that we have, whatever the kind of like assembly the innovations and things, and already all the history that we knew is kind of like assembly very less history that we know. Like let me okay, yeah, let's just understand. Okay, let's just understand. Take a kind of like a dinosaur. Okay, yeah. So basically, is this thing, if I'm gonna say who rule the kind of like a some three species for longer period of time, then you might think that human, but not. Human just kind of like arrive almost like a maybe 10 million ago, 10 million year ago. That's it, probably 10 million, not more than that. And as also my information not exactly right, but somewhat something 10 million year ago. Okay, yeah. But if I'm gonna say the entire history of kind of like assembly Earth and planet, then I realize that the dinosaur is actually rule entire time. Like basically they rule for almost like a 300 million year, more than that, probably 300-400 million year. Okay, yeah. Before this kind of like assembly that meteor happened, almost like a 300-400 million year, they are kind of like going to dominate the planet. Okay, yeah. And this is kind of like something really big, like a 300 million year means like that key, dude. Okay, yeah, like an entire human civilization is actually started almost like a 10 million year ago, and most of our history is actually started almost like a 5,000 year ago. Okay, yeah, like the most of the history that we knew it are actually started from 5,000 or probably almost like a, let's just say 10,000 year. Okay, before that we are just a kind of like a hunter gatherer, and that's it. Okay, yeah. So basically all the history that we knew regarding about World War, the kind of like assembly, all the kind of like assembly civilizations and things, and that we knew is like not the civilization, but kind of like assembly the kind of like assembly empire and kings and queens and things are actually kind of like assembly 10,000. Okay, yeah. Before that we called as a kind of like a prehistory, and we don't really know that much. Like we knew little bit that key kind of like only how does people are kind of like a things and live and stuff like that, but not more than that. Okay, yeah. But when we went to the kind of like a Jurassic time, then we realized that dude, the dinosaur actually ruled the world for more than 300 million year, or I'm not really sure about this exact number, 300 million or 200 million, but they kind of like ruled the world for very very long period of time. Now basically very long period of time means what? Like this is what kind of like a human perception is kind of like a fail to understand how big is time. Okay, yeah. How big is time? Okay. So basically just like imagine a kind of like a ruler scale. Okay, a kind of like a draw the line inside your head. Okay, yeah. Now at the starting point called as a kind of like assembly beginning of earth. Okay, yeah. And the end of that line is a kind of like a at you. Okay, yeah. So basically this is kind of like a timeline, and in this timeline when you are kind of like exist at the end of that line, this is your entire history, entire kind of like a million year history. Rest of the kind of like assembly rule, rest of the kind of like assembly line is kind of like a determined by the earth went to the kind of like assembly multiple species, Jurassic period and things and that and stuff like that. Like basically all the history that we knew is actually kind of like assembly just peak of this end of the line. The rest of the line is still we haven't really discovered, we haven't really knew. We knew there is kind of like a couple of dinosaurs and things and that, but still not that enough, because there is so much amount of time is actually happened and all the evidence is actually gone and things like that. So basically this is our time. This is kind of like a time that human can't even contemplate that how big is this time. And this is kind of like a time is on the planet. When you went to the universal scale, then time is just like so big that you can't even imagine. So big. Like basically for on the universal scale, millions of year is considered as a kind of like somebody just a second. Because when you try to kind of like went to the kind of like somebody the universal scale, the time is like boy. Okay. Now basically if I'm gonna say the Big Bang is actually happened almost like a 14 billion year ago. Okay, 14 billion? Yeah, 14 billion year ago. Okay, huh? Now basically 13, 14 like okay. I'm gonna give you kind of like some question. You have to guess the answer. Okay, yeah. 1 billion second means how much time? 1 billion second. Just guess the number. Okay, if you are guessing maybe probably 2 year, 3 year, some people might gonna say 5 year, some people might gonna say like basically, yeah, this is kind of like the time that we are kind of like a thinking. Just do the Google. Okay, yeah. 1 billion second means 34 fucking year. 34 year. Yeah. Legitly, yeah. Like 1 billion second means 34 year. Like basically if you have started counting now, it will kind of like really require you to kind of like a 34 year to complete this count to went into the billion. And this is how big is that. And I'm talking about in the universal scale, time is just like far more beyond. It's like human can't even kind of like somebody contemplate this information. It was like a very big, very big. It's a beyond our perception. And that's why we can't even understand the time that much. And as also, okay, this is just a time. It is so big. But when you kind of like assembly understanding the scientific point of perspective looking at the time, then it will kind of like even more bigger. Like basically time is a kind of like a fabric. It can stretch and it can contract. Okay, yeah. Means like that if you went close to the black hole, your time goes really fast. Okay, yeah. And if you're kind of like a somebody just doing a normal day and things, it was time just normal. Time is just like a really flexible. And basically all around the world, like basically the Newton kind of like says that ki time is a universal constant. It never gonna change. Everything is actually happened exactly at the same time and things like that. But the Einstein kind of like somebody determined, no, time is not a time is not a constant, it's a flexible. It's a kind of like a somebody relative regarding about the gravity and the speed and things like that. There is a lot of things actually happened. Okay, yeah. So I'm not gonna go into that scientific point of perspective regarding about the time and things and space time and stuff like that. It was far more beyond. Okay, yeah. Like basically, if you actually imagine, okay, we are considering that we are really good species. We are humans. We are so big. We are kind of like evolved that much. We are kind of like somebody dominating the planet. We are kind of like exploring the other planets and things, and that we are really good. But if you are kind of like looking at the time, then probably we just realize that dude, it's very small. Okay, let's just compare. Okay, yeah. Do you believe that UFO or any other alien civilization, intelligent alien civilization, is exist or not? It's kind of like something. It's up to you. Now your answer might be kind of like somewhat something say yes, somewhat something say no. Okay, yeah. What is exactly my belief? What is exactly is this thing? My belief is that we are not that much lucky. Okay, yeah. And in the universe, Earth-like planet are actually exist in abundant. Yeah, or abundant in number. Okay, yeah. Why I'm saying abundant. Abundant means like that there is so many planets are so much better than Earth, bigger than Earth, really good. Like basically they are meant to be kind of like survive the life, and definitely the life is still exist on that particular planet. Okay, yeah. But the problem is that the distance and time, there is a space and time. Okay, yeah. Let's just imagine there is a super intelligent alien civilization is actually exist in another part of universe. We might even knew it. Why? Because it is so far away that probably we don't even knew it. Like basically all the technology that we have, we cannot map the how much big is universe is that, because universe is so big that probably we just can't understand that. Okay, and in addition, time, like basically is this thing, might be there is a kind of like a somebody ancient civilization, ancient alien civilization is kind of like a somebody exist before our earth is formed. Yeah, so probably is this thing, having a kind of like a somebody contact with the alien species is exist on the universe. And another thing that kind of like a alien species is kind of like a somebody communicate with us, it's a kind of like a coincidence, very big coincidence. Because like probably I'm not saying that ancient civilization, ancient alien civilization not exist, they will gonna exist, but having contact with them, it's not possible. Why? Because of that space and time, because the space is so big that probably is this saying that there might be a kind of like an ancient alien civilization that actually exists at the moment at the another age of the universe that we don't might knew it. Okay, let me give you example. What is actually the fastest thing that goes, fastest thing travel on this universe? Light. Light is the only one thing that can go fastest. No one can beat light. no one can go beyond the light. Okay, light is a kind of like a something a fastest thing that travel in space. Okay, now basically is this thing, even if we are kind of like a build such a spaceship that goes kind of like a somebody goes to the kind of like a somebody at the speed of the light, if that particular alien civilization actually exists at another age of the universe, and if you are trying to go to that particular universe particular age of the universe, it took us almost like a maybe millions of year to reach there millions of year. Like probably have you ever understand you take almost like a millions of year to travel. It was like, dude. Yeah. So another thing is that now I'm not saying that ki ancient alien civilization are not exist. I'm completely disagree that. I'm completely agree that ki there is some sort of alien civilization is actually exist in our universe, because Earth is not the special, and I knew like a Kepler and multiple kind of like a telescope is actually found such a planet. Those are kind of like a really habitat for life and things like that. Okay, yeah. So probably is this thing that ki mostly there is a kind of like some sort of kind of like a species actually evolved in that particular time, and they actually evolved, became intelligence and things like that. Okay, yeah. But the main issues is that ki we might not connect with them because the time and space between us, because it is so big that still we can't even imagine how big is that. And this is where kind of like somebody we just, yeah. Now then obviously is this thing, what if we kind of like invent such a technology that we could kind of like go faster than light? No one can goes. It's a universal law that we cannot go faster than light than that. Why? Because universe try to stop you to not to go faster than that light. What? Why? How is actually universe actually stopping you? Well, basically it's this thing that ki if you kind of like somebody made up such a kind of like a spaceship that go faster than that light, and when you kind of like hit the power button and kind of like push that spaceship into the maximum potential and thrust and things, times go slow to you to kind of like reduce the speed and things like that. So basically you will never gonna go faster than light. There is a way that you can reach to the other side of the universe faster than the light, and that is a way called wormhole, or kind of like assembly wormhole or stuff like that. Okay, but still we haven't really kind of like grasped that technology, which is kind of like assembly far beyond our reach and stuff like that. Whatever. Okay, yeah. So basically is this thing, the question is that what if the time existed outside the human perception? It's actually exist. Yeah, the time that we knew it is kind of like something out of our human perception. It's still we don't really understand that much better. This is it. I should supposed to be end here. Thank you.